In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every valley and courage is measured in heartbeats, they said a woman had no place among warriors. They said she was too small, too soft, too different to save lives when bullets started flying.
But when Navy SEAL Team 7 found themselves trapped behind enemy lines with their medic down and hope running out, it wasn't the strongest soldier or the most experienced operator who stepped between them and certain death. It was the one person they had doubted from day one, a 5'4" combat medic whose steady hands and unbreakable spirit would rewrite everything they thought they knew about heroism.
This is the story of how being underestimated became her greatest weapon, and how one mission changed 8 lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Chapman as Dr.
Sarah Chen finished her third cup of coffee, reviewing medical supply inventories on her tablet. At 2700799075, one in Afghanistan. But this assignment felt different.
She wasn't just another Army medic attached to a regular infantry unit. This time, she had been handpicked to work alongside Navy SEAL Team 7, a brotherhood that had never included someone like her.
So, you are going to have another?
Sarah adjusted her desert camouflage uniform and checked her watch. The briefing would start in 20 minutes, and she knew all eyes would be on her again. Since arriving at the base 3 weeks ago, she had felt the weight of constant scrutiny. The SEALs weren't openly hostile, but their skepticism hung in the air like smoke from burning diesel fuel. They had worked with combat medics before, but never a woman, and certainly never someone who looked like she belonged in a research lab rather than a war zone. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall with delicate features and wire-rimmed glasses, Sarah understood their doubt. Her hands looked better suited for holding surgical instruments than hauling wounded soldiers to safety. But those same hands had performed emergency surgery in the back of a moving Humvee, had stopped arterial bleeding while under mortar fire, and had brought more soldiers home alive than she cared to count. The base was already buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Helicopters circled overhead while supply convoys rumbled through the gates. Sarah had grown accustomed to the constant noise, the distant thump of artillery, the whine of generators, the crackle of radio communications. It was the soundtrack of war, and after 3 tours, it had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat.
She made her way across the compound toward the briefing room, nodding to familiar faces along the way. Soldiers from various units offered respectful greetings, many of the men she had treated for everything from gunshot wounds to severe dehydration.
Here among the regular army, her reputation preceded her in the best possible way. These soldiers knew her skills, respected her dedication, and trusted her completely. But SEAL Team 7 was different. They were a closed circle bound by shared experiences she couldn't access and a culture that had never made room for someone like her. The briefing room was already half full when she arrived. She took a seat in the back, knowing that positioning mattered in these situations. Too far forward seemed presumptuous, too far back might appear disengaged. She had learned to navigate these social dynamics carefully, understanding that every action was analyzed and judged by men who were still deciding whether she belonged among them. Team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison entered the room with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention.
6'3" of pure muscle and confidence, Morrison had led SEAL Team 7 through countless successful operations over the past 8 years. His reputation was legendary. The kind of operator who could infiltrate enemy territory, complete impossible missions, and bring his entire team home safely.
He was also the man who had specifically requested that Sarah be assigned elsewhere when he learned about her deployment. Morrison's objections hadn't been personal, at least not entirely.
He argued that team chemistry was crucial to survival, that introducing an unknown variable could compromise operational effectiveness. He worried about how his men would react under pressure, whether protective instincts might override tactical judgment, whether the enemy would exploit what they perceived as weakness.
His concerns were logical, professional, and completely infuriating to Sarah, who had heard variations of the same argument throughout her entire military career. The other team members filtered in over the next few minutes, each one a study in controlled lethality.
There was Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the team's communications specialist, whose easygoing personality masked razor-sharp intelligence. Petty Officer First Class David Kim served as the team's explosive ordnance expert, a soft-spoken man whose gentle demeanor disappeared entirely when working with dangerous devices.
Senior Chief Marcus Johnson was the team's sniper, a patient hunter who could remain motionless for hours before taking a single perfect shot. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Rivera handled reconnaissance and surveillance, his natural athleticism making him invaluable for rapid movement through difficult terrain.
Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tommy Walsh had been the team's medic for the past 2 years,
a competent field medic whose skills were perfectly adequate for most situations. Finally, there was Chief Petty Officer Ray Santos, Morrison's second-in-command and the team's demolitions expert, a grizzled veteran whose loyalty to Morrison was absolute. Sarah studied each man as he entered, noting the way they interacted with casual familiarity born from shared danger. These weren't just colleagues. They were brothers who had bled together, fought together, and trusted each other with their lives. Breaking into that brotherhood would require more than medical expertise. It would require proving herself worthy of the ultimate sacrifice each man was prepared to make for the others.
Morrison called the briefing to order, his voice cutting through the casual conversation like a blade. "Gentlemen," he began, then paused, his eyes finding Sarah in the back row.
"And lady, we've got a new mission coming down from command. Intelligence suggests that a high-value target has been located in the Korengal Valley. This is a capture mission, not elimination, which means we need this individual alive and conscious for interrogation."
He activated the projection screen, showing satellite images of a remote mountain village surrounded by treacherous terrain. The target area was isolated, accessible only through narrow mountain passes that could easily become death traps if the operation went sideways.
Sarah leaned forward, studying the topographical details and noting the locations where medical evacuation would be challenging or impossible. The target is believed to be a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region.
Morrison continued.
Intelligence indicates he's been operating from this village for several weeks, using it as a base for planning future operations. Our job is to infiltrate the area, locate and capture the target, and extract him for questioning. Senior Chief Johnson raised his hand.
What's the expected enemy strength, sir? Initial estimates suggest between 15 and 20 fighters, possibly more. The village has been fortified and we should expect significant resistance.
The terrain heavily favors the defending force, which means we'll need to be smart about our approach and extraction routes. Sarah absorbed every detail, already thinking through potential medical scenarios. Mountain operations presented unique challenges: altitude sickness, hypothermia, limited evacuation options, and the increased likelihood of traumatic injuries from falls or explosive devices. She mentally reviewed her medical supplies, considering what additional equipment might be necessary for this specific environment. Morrison outlined the basic operational plan. The team would insert via helicopter at a landing zone approximately 3 kilometers from the target village. They would approach on foot during the pre-dawn hours, establish observation positions, and wait for the optimal moment to strike. The capture needed to happen quickly and quietly, before enemy reinforcements could arrive, or the target could escape into the mountains.
"Medical support," Morrison said, his gaze shifting to Sarah.
Dr. Chen will be accompanying us on this operation. I want to be clear about expectations and limitations.
This is a combat mission in hostile territory. Medical personnel will be expected to keep pace with the team, maintain operational security, and follow orders without question. This isn't a training exercise. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. Morrison's tone suggested he expected her to fail to prove his original assessment correct. She had encountered this attitude before: military leaders who agreed to include her while secretly hoping she would demonstrate her own inadequacy and solve their diversity problem for them.
Sir? She replied evenly. I understand the mission requirements and am prepared to fulfill my medical responsibilities while maintaining tactical discipline. Several team members exchanged glances, perhaps surprised by her calm response to what had sounded very much like a challenge. Sarah had learned long ago that reacting emotionally to professional skepticism only reinforced existing prejudices. The best response was competent performance under pressure. But she rarely got the chance to demonstrate her capabilities before judgment had already been rendered. Morrison continued with operational details: insertion times, communication protocols, extraction contingencies. Sarah took detailed notes, paying particular attention to information that might affect medical planning. The operation was scheduled to begin in 72 hours, which gave her limited time to prepare specialized equipment and review medical evacuation procedures for the specific terrain.
After the briefing concluded, the team members clustered around Morrison for additional details while Sarah gathered her materials. She was halfway to the door when Hospital Corpsman Walsh approached her with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern.
Dr. Chen, he said quietly, I wanted to talk to you about medical protocols for this mission. I've been handling field medicine for this team, and I'm wondering how we're going to coordinate our efforts. Sarah appreciated his directness. Walsh was a good medic with solid tactical medicine skills, but his training was limited compared to her medical school education and trauma surgery experience. The potential for conflict existed, particularly if team members continued seeking medical attention from Walsh while ignoring her presence entirely.
"I'd like to review your standard medical loadout and discuss how we might divide responsibilities," she replied. "My understanding is that I'll be primary medical officer for this mission, but I want to make sure we're not duplicating efforts or creating confusion about chain of command for medical decisions." Walsh nodded, looking relieved that she wasn't planning to dismiss his contributions entirely.
I was thinking I could continue handling routine medical issues while you focus on trauma medicine and anything requiring advanced procedures. Most of these guys are more comfortable with me anyway, at least for now.
It was an honest assessment, and Sarah appreciated his candor. Building trust with SEAL Team 7 would take time she didn't have. But Walsh had already established relationships that could prove valuable if medical emergencies arose during the mission.
That sounds like a reasonable division of labor, she agreed. But I'll need detailed information about each team member's medical history, current medications, and any ongoing health issues that might affect performance under stress.
Over the next hour, Walsh briefed her on the team's medical profiles. Morrison had undergone shoulder surgery 2 years earlier and occasionally experienced stiffness during cold weather operations.
Tara's had mild hearing loss from explosive exposure but compensated well with enhanced visual awareness. Kim suffered from seasonal allergies that could affect breathing in dusty environments.
The information was routine but valuable for understanding how each man might respond to physical stress. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the base medical facility, reviewing her equipment and mentally preparing for the mission.
She had requested additional supplies specifically suited for mountain operations: hypothermia treatment materials, altitude sickness medications, enhanced trauma supplies for potential falls or explosive injuries. Her medical pack would weigh nearly 40 pounds, but she had carried heavier loads through worse terrain. The door opened and Senior Chief Johnson entered, carrying what appeared to be a minor hand injury. Sarah looked up expectantly, but Johnson hesitated in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Is Walsh around?" he asked, glancing toward the empty office area.
"He's at Chow," Sarah replied, gesturing toward an examination chair. "But I can take a look at whatever's bothering you."
Johnson remained standing, obviously conflicted between his need for medical attention and his reluctance to interact with her professionally.
Sarah had encountered this reaction countless times. Soldiers who intellectually accepted her presence but emotionally struggled with seeking help from someone they didn't fully trust or understand. "It's just a small cut from maintenance work," Johnson said finally, extending his hand for examination.
Probably doesn't need much attention. Sarah examined the injury carefully, noting that while the laceration was relatively minor, it showed signs of contamination that could lead to infection if not properly cleaned and dressed. She worked efficiently, irrigating the wound and applying appropriate dressing while Johnson watched her hands with the focused attention of someone evaluating performance under scrutiny.
"Keep it dry for the next 48 hours, she instructed, securing the bandage. "Change the dressing daily and watch for signs of infection, increased redness, warmth, swelling, or discharge. If any of those symptoms develop, see Walsh or myself immediately." Johnson flexed his fingers, testing the dressing's security. "Thanks, Doc," he said quietly, and Sarah caught something that might have been surprise in his voice. Perhaps he had expected her to fumble the procedure, to demonstrate the inadequacy Morrison anticipated.
After Johnson left, Sarah returned to her equipment preparations, but her mind kept returning to the brief interaction. The pressure was exhausting, particularly when she knew that her male colleagues never faced the same constant evaluation of their basic competence. The next 2 days passed in intensive preparation.
Sarah spent hours reviewing the operational plan, studying topographical maps, and coordinating with Walsh on medical supply distribution. She participated in equipment checks, weapons familiarization, and communication protocol reviews, maintaining professional focus while enduring the team's continued skepticism.
During a pre-mission briefing, Morrison addressed the team's concerns directly. "I know some of you have reservations about including Dr. Poff, Chen, on this operation," he said, his tone suggesting he shared those reservations. "But the decision has been made by higher command and will adapt accordingly. Dr.
Chen is a qualified combat medic with extensive field experience. She'll be treated as a full team member with all the responsibilities that entails."
It was hardly a ringing endorsement, but Sarah appreciated Morrison's effort to establish her authority within the team structure. She understood that his public support, however reluctant, was crucial to her acceptance by the other team members. The night before departure, Sarah conducted final equipment checks in her quarters. Her medical pack contained everything necessary to handle major trauma in the field: surgical instruments, medications, IV fluids, airway management devices, and specialized equipment for treating combat injuries.
She had also packed personal items carefully, knowing that every ounce of weight would matter during the mountain approach.
A knock on her door interrupted her preparations. She opened it to find Morrison standing in the corridor, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Dr. Chen," he said formally, "I wanted to discuss tomorrow's mission and make sure there are no misunderstandings about expectations or procedures." Sarah stepped aside to let him enter, noting the careful way he positioned himself near the door, close enough for conversation but far enough to maintain professional distance.
Morrison's body language suggested discomfort with the entire situation, as though he was following orders he disagreed with but couldn't openly challenge.
"Sir," she replied, "I understand this situation isn't ideal from your perspective.
But I want you to know that I take my responsibilities seriously and won't compromise mission effectiveness or team safety." Morrison studied her face as though trying to determine whether her confidence was genuine or merely bravado.
"Dr. Chen, I've read your service record.
Your medical skills aren't in question. But SEAL operations are different from regular Army missions.
The margin for error is smaller, the consequences more severe. These men have worked together for years, and introducing a new variable at this stage creates risks I'm not comfortable accepting." Sarah appreciated his honesty even though it stung. "Sir, I understand your concerns.
But I've operated in similar high-stress environments before. I know how to follow orders, maintain tactical discipline, and keep pace with infantry units in difficult terrain."
"I won't be a liability to your team." "I hope you're right," Morrison replied, but his tone suggested genuine doubt rather than mere skepticism. "Because if something goes wrong tomorrow, if my men get hurt because I was forced to include someone who couldn't handle the pressure, that's responsibility I'll carry for the rest of my career." After Morrison left, Sarah sat on her bunk and stared at her equipment laid out across the small room. Tomorrow would determine whether months of training and preparation had been sufficient, whether she could earn the trust of men who had every reason to doubt her capabilities. She thought about her father, who had served in Vietnam and taught her that respect in the military was earned through performance under pressure, not granted through good intentions or political correctness. The base fell silent as midnight approached, but Sarah remained awake, mentally rehearsing medical procedures and reviewing the operational plan one final time.
In less than 6 hours, she would board a helicopter with SEAL Team 7 and fly into mountains where her competence would be measured not in test scores or training evaluations, but in her ability to keep good men alive when everything went wrong. She finally fell asleep near dawn, her dreams filled with mountain peaks and the distant sound of helicopters. Unaware that the mission ahead would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, about war, and about the price of earning a place among warriors who had never imagined someone like her could belong in their world.
The UHS-60 Blackhawk lifted off from forward operating base Chapman at 0347 hours, its rotors cutting through the pre-dawn darkness as it carried SEAL Team 7 toward their target in the Korengal Valley.
Sarah sat between Torres and Kim, her medical pack secured tightly against her chest, while the helicopter's vibration traveled through her body like a low-frequency heartbeat. Through the open door, she could see mountain peaks emerging from shadows as first light began to touch the highest elevations.
Morrison sat across from her, his face painted with camouflage and his eyes focused on something beyond the helicopter's bulkhead. Each team member had applied face paint in practice patterns that broke up facial features and reduced visibility, but Sarah noticed that her own reflection in the window looked somehow different, smaller, more vulnerable despite the same tactical gear and weapons load as the others. The flight took 43 minutes, following a route designed to avoid known enemy positions while approaching the landing zone from an unexpected direction. Sarah used the time to review her mental checklist of medical procedures, running through trauma treatment protocols, and considering how altitude and terrain would affect her ability to provide emergency care. At nearly 8,000 feet elevation, oxygen would be thinner, physical exertion more demanding, and medical evacuation complicated by weather and enemy presence.
Chief Santos passed hand signals down the line as they approached the landing zone, indicating 5 minutes to touchdown. Sarah checked her weapon for the 4th time, ensuring the safety was engaged while ammunition was properly loaded.
She had qualified expert marksman with both rifle and pistol, but her primary weapon remained the medical knowledge and supplies that could keep team members alive long enough for evacuation. The helicopter descended rapidly toward a flat area between rocky outcroppings, its downwash creating a cloud of dust and debris that obscured visibility for several seconds.
Morrison was first out the door, followed immediately by Johnson and Rivera, who established security positions while the others disembarked. Sarah exited 5th in the planned sequence, her boots hitting rocky ground as the helicopter's engines wound down to a whisper. Within 90 seconds, the Black Hawk lifted off and disappeared into the darkness,
leaving 8 individuals alone in hostile territory with no immediate means of extraction. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from preparation to execution. When theoretical plans became life-or-death reality and every decision carried permanent consequences, Morrison used hand signals to direct the team's movement toward their observation positions overlooking the target village. The terrain was exactly as brutal as the satellite images had suggested: loose rock, steep gradients, and narrow passages that would funnel movement through predictable choke points. Sarah adjusted her pack's weight distribution and fell into line behind Kim, matching his careful pace while scanning for potential medical evacuation routes. The approach took nearly 2 hours of careful movement through terrain that tested everyone's physical conditioning and tactical discipline. Sarah concentrated on maintaining proper spacing behind Kim while avoiding loose rocks that might create noise or cause falls. Her medical pack seemed to gain weight with each step, but she forced herself to ignore the discomfort and focus on the mission objectives. They established observation positions in rocky outcropping approximately 400 meters from the village as first light began to illuminate the valley below. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the target compound, a cluster of traditional stone buildings surrounded by walls that provided both protection and concealment. Smoke rose from cooking fires, while figures moved between buildings in patterns that suggested normal morning activity.
Morrison positioned himself next to Johnson, the team sniper, while Torres established communication with base operations. Sarah found herself assigned to a position between Walsh and Rivera, where she could observe the target area, while remaining available for immediate medical response if the situation deteriorated rapidly.
The village appeared peaceful in the early morning light, with children playing in courtyards and women hanging laundry on rooftops. Sarah felt the familiar conflict between her medical oath to preserve life and her military duty to accomplish the mission, knowing that the capture operation would likely result in casualties among both enemy fighters and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire.
Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Morrison coordinating with base operations while Johnson provided detailed surveillance reports about enemy positions and movement patterns. Intelligence had been accurate about the village's fortification. Fighting positions had been prepared in multiple buildings. Weapons emplacements covered the main approaches, and guards maintained constant vigilance from elevated positions.
Target confirmed in the central compound, Johnson whispered over the team radio. I've got eyes on the individual matching the description provided by intelligence.
He's moving between buildings with what appears to be a security detail of 6 armed individuals. Sarah adjusted her position to get a better view of the target area, noting the locations where casualties were most likely to occur during the assault. The narrow alleyways between buildings would create fatal funnels where wounded personnel might be trapped under enemy fire, complicating any medical response and making evacuation extremely difficult. Morrison spent the next 3 hours refining the assault plan based on real-time observation of enemy positions and movement patterns. The original plan had called for a direct approach through the main entrance, but surveillance revealed that route would expose the team to crossfire from multiple positions. Instead, Morrison decided to split the team and approach from 2 directions simultaneously, creating confusion and dividing enemy attention. Dr. Chen, Morrison whispered over the radio. You'll be positioned with Santos during the initial assault. Your job is to establish a casualty collection point in the building we've designated as Rally Point 2. Walsh will accompany the assault element and provide immediate medical support, but any serious casualties will be brought to your position for stabilization. Sarah acknowledged the order while mentally reviewing the layout of the designated building. It offered good cover from enemy fire while providing multiple exit routes if evacuation became necessary. The position would also allow her to monitor radio communications and coordinate medical evacuation if multiple casualties occurred simultaneously.
The assault began at 12:47 hours, when Johnson eliminated 2 sentries with precisely aimed shots that dropped both targets silently. Morrison's element moved through the main compound, while Santos led the secondary team through a breach in the rear wall, both groups advancing with practiced precision toward the building where the target had been located.
Sarah established her medical position in the designated rally point, laying out trauma supplies and preparing treatment areas for potential casualties. Through her earpiece, she could hear the controlled chaos of the assault, terse radio reports, the distinctive crack of rifle fire, and the heavier sound of automatic weapons as enemy fighters responded to the attack. The first casualty report came 12 minutes into the assault. Man down in Building 3, Torres transmitted over the radio. Rivera took a round to the left shoulder, conscious and alert but needs immediate medical attention. Sarah felt her pulse accelerate as Walsh's voice came over the radio. I'm with Rivera now, applying pressure dressing to control bleeding. Wound appears to be through and through. No major arterial involvement. I can stabilize him for movement to the casualty collection point. Bring him to Rally Point 2, Morrison ordered.
Dr. Chen is standing by for advanced treatment.
Sarah double-checked her supplies and prepared IV equipment while waiting for Rivera's arrival. Through the stone walls, she could hear the continuing firefight as the team worked to isolate and capture the target.
Automatic weapons fire echoed through the narrow valley, punctuated by the sharper crack of precision rifle shots and the occasional explosion of grenades. Walsh appeared at the building entrance 8 minutes later, supporting Rivera, who was walking but clearly in significant pain.
Blood had soaked through the pressure dressing on his left shoulder, and his face was pale from blood loss and shock. Sarah immediately guided him to the prepared treatment area and began her assessment.
"How are you feeling, Rivera?" she asked while cutting away his uniform to expose the wound. The bullet had entered through the anterior aspect of his left shoulder and exited cleanly through the back, missing major blood vessels but causing significant soft tissue damage.
"Been better, Doc," Rivera replied through gritted teeth. "But I can still fight if you can patch me up." Sarah established IV access and began fluid replacement while cleaning and dressing the wound properly.
The injury was painful but not immediately life-threatening, assuming they could control infection and prevent further blood loss. However, Rivera's left arm would be essentially useless for the remainder of the mission, reducing the team's combat effectiveness at a critical moment. "The good news is that the bullet missed major structures," Sarah explained while securing the dressing. "You're going to have full function once this heals properly. The bad news is that you're done fighting for today. That arm needs to be immobilized to prevent further damage."
Rivera started to protest, but Sarah cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "This isn't a discussion, Rivera.
You've lost a significant amount of blood, and trying to use that arm will cause more tissue damage.
You can walk and you can think, but you can't shoot." Walsh had remained during the treatment, observing Sarah's technique and ready to assist if needed. Sarah noticed his expression of professional respect as she worked, the kind of recognition that came from watching someone demonstrate superior skills under pressure. "Nice work, Doc," Walsh said quietly. Clean, efficient, and exactly what he needed. Before Sarah could respond, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio with urgency that made everyone freeze. "We've got a problem. The target has barricaded himself in the central building with what appears to be a suicide vest. He's threatening to detonate if we approach. We need to reassess the situation." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she considered the implications. A suicide bombing in the confined space of the village would likely cause multiple casualties among both team members and civilians, creating a mass casualty situation that would overwhelm her medical capabilities. She began mentally preparing for the possibility of treating multiple trauma patients simultaneously while under continued enemy fire. "Additionally," Morrison continued, "we've got movement on the ridgeline to the east. Appears to be enemy reinforcements moving to cut off our extraction route. We may be looking at a fighting withdrawal through difficult terrain with limited medical evacuation options." Sarah looked at Rivera, who was listening to the radio traffic with growing concern. "Their planned extraction would require a grueling hike through mountain terrain to reach the helicopter landing zone, a journey that would be challenging for a healthy individual and potentially impossible for someone with significant injuries." "How long can you walk?" she asked Rivera directly. "I'm not talking about what you want to do or think you should do. I'm asking for an honest assessment of your physical capabilities." Rivera considered the question seriously before answering. "With the pain medication you gave me, probably 6 hours of steady movement before I start to compromise the team's pace. Maybe longer if we're not under fire, but less if we have to move fast or fight our way out." It was an honest assessment, and Sarah appreciated his candor. Rivera understood that overestimating his capabilities could endanger the entire team if he collapsed during a critical phase of the extraction. She made a mental note to monitor his condition carefully and be prepared to recommend difficult decisions if his injuries worsened. The radio erupted with automatic weapons fire and shouted commands as the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos with professional calm despite the obvious stress of command decisions under fire. "Santos, take Kim and establish security on our eastern flank. Those reinforcements are getting close and we need to keep them from cutting us off. Torres, get me communication with base operations. We may need emergency extraction if this situation continues to deteriorate." Sarah realized that her role was about to expand beyond treating existing casualties to preparing for a potential running firefight through mountain terrain while carrying wounded team members. She began repacking her medical supplies for rapid movement, prioritizing items that would be essential for treating trauma while discarding anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. "Walsh," she called quietly, "help me repack these supplies for movement.
We need to be ready to displace rapidly if Morrison decides we can't hold this position. Together, they consolidated medical equipment into configurations that could be carried efficiently while still providing essential trauma care capabilities. Sarah's original 40-pound medical pack was reduced to 28 pounds of absolutely critical supplies, with everything else cached for potential recovery during extraction. The sound of helicopters approaching from the south provided momentary hope, until Torres reported over the radio that the aircraft were enemy MESA, 2-4 gunships rather than friendly extraction platforms. The tactical situation had shifted from a controlled capture operation to a desperate fight for survival against superior numbers in terrain that heavily favored the enemy.
All elements, this is Morrison, the team leader transmitted with deadly calm. We're initiating emergency extraction protocol. Santos, your team will establish overwatch positions to cover our movement. Johnson, I need you to keep those gunships honest until we can reach dead ground. Everyone else, we're moving to extraction point 2 in 15 minutes. Sarah helped Rivera to his feet and tested his ability to move under his own power. The pain medication was working, but she could see the strain in his face as he adjusted to carrying his equipment with only one functional arm. The extraction would require nearly 4 hours of movement through terrain that would challenge even healthy individuals.
Rivera, she said seriously, I want you to tell me immediately if you start feeling dizzy, nauseous, or confused. Those could be signs of blood loss or shock, and we need to catch any problems before they become critical. Roger that, Doc, Rivera replied, managing a weak smile despite their desperate situation. And thanks for patching me up.
I know the guys weren't sure about having you along, but you've already proved your worth today. It was the first direct acknowledgement from any team member that her presence might be valuable rather than problematic.
Sarah felt a surge of professional pride mixed with determination to continue proving herself worthy of their trust even as the mission spiraled into the kind of catastrophe that would test everyone's limits. The sound of enemy gunships grew louder as Morrison made the final decision to abandon the capture mission and focus entirely on survival. Sarah shouldered her reduced medical pack and prepared to follow SEAL Team 7 into the mountains, knowing that the hardest part of their ordeal was just beginning. The emergency extraction began at 14:34 hours under a gray sky that promised afternoon thunderstorms. In the high mountains, Morrison led the team through a narrow passage between rocky outcroppings while enemy gunships circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their crew-served weapons searching for targets among the broken terrain. Sarah stayed close to Rivera, monitoring his condition while maintaining the rapid pace necessary to reach cover before the helicopters could establish effective firing positions.
The first kilometer of movement tested everyone's physical conditioning as they climbed steep slopes covered with loose scree that shifted unpredictably underfoot. Sarah felt her heart rate climb as the thin air at 8,000 feet elevation demanded more from lungs accustomed to lower altitudes. Behind her, she could hear Rivera's labored breathing as he struggled to keep pace while favoring his wounded shoulder. Santos had positioned Kim and himself in overwatch positions to provide covering fire if the gunships attempted direct attacks, but the helicopters seemed content to maintain surveillance while ground forces maneuvered to cut off escape routes.
Sarah could see armed figures moving along ridgelines in the distance. Enemy fighters who knew the terrain intimately and were positioning themselves to intercept the team at predictable choke points. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" asked Rivera during a brief halt while Morrison studied the route ahead through binoculars.
I'm good for now, Rivera replied, though his face was pale and she could see pain lines around his eyes. The medication is helping, but I can feel it starting to wear off. Sarah checked her watch and calculated dosage timing.
Rivera could have additional pain medication in another 2 hours, but she was concerned about giving him anything that might affect his alertness or balance during the treacherous mountain descent that lay ahead. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio with controlled urgency.
Enemy movement confirmed on ridgeline 700 meters northeast of our position. They're moving to cut us off at the pass. We're going to have to take the long route through the valley system. Sarah's heart sank as she realized what Morrison meant.
The direct route to the extraction point would take 3 hours through relatively easy terrain. The valley route would require 6 to 8 hours of movement through some of the most challenging mountain terrain in Afghanistan, assuming they could avoid enemy contact entirely.
Torres had been monitoring communications with base operations, trying to coordinate helicopter support or artillery strikes that might give them breathing room. But the mountain terrain interfered with radio signals, and their position was too close to civilian areas for effective use of supporting arms. "Base operations is trying to get us air support," Torres reported quietly, "but weather is moving in from the west, and aviation assets are limited due to other priority missions. They're working on it, but we shouldn't count on external support for at least 4 hours." The team resumed movement through terrain that grew increasingly difficult as they descended into the valley system. Rocky passages gave way to steep slopes covered with loose stone that cascaded downward with each step. Sarah found herself using her hands as much as her feet,
grateful for the tactical gloves that protected her palms from sharp edges.
Rivera was struggling more obviously now, his left arm completely useless and his balance affected by pain and medication. Sarah moved closer to him, ready to provide assistance if he lost his footing on the treacherous slopes.
She also kept careful watch for signs that blood loss or shock might be affecting his cognitive function. They had been moving for 2 hours when Johnson, who was providing rear security, reported enemy contact.
I've got armed individuals approximately 800 meters behind our position, moving to maintain contact. Looks like a tracking team rather than direct pursuit.
Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Enemy trackers would maintain pressure on their movement while calling in additional forces to establish ambush positions ahead. It was a classic tactic in mountain warfare, using terrain and local knowledge to gradually exhaust and isolate enemy forces until they could be destroyed piecemeal. Morrison made the difficult decision to increase their pace, despite the challenging terrain and Rivera's injuries.
Every minute of delay gave enemy forces more time to organize and position themselves for effective attacks. Sarah realized that she might soon face the awful choice between keeping Rivera moving at a pace that could worsen his injuries, or allowing the team to be caught by pursuing forces.
The valley floor was crossed by a stream swollen with snowmelt from higher elevations, its icy water running knee-deep through pools between rocky cascades. Morrison decided they needed to cross immediately rather than follow the stream toward easier crossing points that enemy forces might have anticipated. Sarah went second immediately behind Morrison so she could assist Rivera during his crossing. The current was stronger than it appeared from the bank and the water was shockingly cold even through waterproof boots and gaiters.
She fought to maintain balance on the slippery rocks while keeping her medical pack above water level. Rivera entered the stream behind her and Sarah immediately saw he was in trouble. His injured shoulder prevented him from using both arms for balance, and the current knocked him sideways toward deeper water. Without hesitation, Sarah moved back toward him, grabbing his equipment harness with one hand, while bracing herself against the current.
"I've got you," she said firmly, helping him regain footing on the rocky bottom. "Take it slow and let me help you balance." Together they worked across the stream, Sarah serving as an anchor point while Rivera navigated the treacherous footing with one functional arm. By the time they reached the far bank, both were soaked and shivering, but Rivera's injury showed no signs of renewed bleeding despite the stress of the crossing. Kim had moved ahead to scout the route up the far slope while Santos maintained overwatch on their back trail.
The climbing would be the most challenging phase yet. Nearly vertical rock faces that required technical climbing skills and upper body strength that Rivera no longer possessed.
Morrison, Sarah called quietly as the team leader studied the cliff face above them.
Rivera isn't going to be able to climb that with a useless shoulder. We need to either find another route or develop a way to assist him up the rock face. Morrison turned to examine Rivera's condition, his expression grim as he recognized the seriousness of the situation.
Rivera was obviously exhausted and in significant pain despite his efforts to conceal his deteriorating condition. The cliff face above them would challenge even healthy climbers, and attempting it with a serious shoulder injury invited disaster.
"Options?" Morrison asked tersely. Sarah had been thinking about this problem for the past hour.
"We can set up a mechanical advantage system using climbing rope and anchors. It will take additional time, but we can effectively haul Rivera up the cliff face while he provides what assistance he can with his legs."
Johnson's voice interrupted their planning. "Enemy movement closing from our 6 o'clock. I count at least 12 individuals approximately 600 meters in closing. They know where we are." Morrison made the tactical decision quickly. Santos, Kim, established fighting positions to delay pursuit. "Torres, get on the radio and tell base operations we need immediate extraction at grid coordinates I'm about to transmit."
Dr. Chen, get that rope system set up now.
Sarah moved into action with practiced efficiency, pulling climbing rope from her pack and identifying suitable anchor points in the rock face above. The system she had in mind would distribute Rivera's weight among multiple team members while using mechanical advantage to reduce the actual lifting required.
Walsh worked alongside her, following her instructions while keeping one eye on the developing tactical situation below. Enemy forces were moving closer, using the broken terrain for concealment while maintaining pressure on the team's position. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire as Santos and Kim engaged targets at long range.
"Rivera," Sarah called over the noise of gunfire. "We're going to get you up this cliff, but I need you to help as much as possible with your legs. Push with your feet against the rock face while we handle the lifting."
Rivera nodded, understanding, his face pale but determined. Sarah could see that he understood the tactical situation. The team was trapped between pursuing forces and a cliff face that represented their only escape route. His injury was potentially dooming everyone unless they could find a way to overcome the vertical obstacle.
The rope system took 8 precious minutes to establish, while gunfire intensified below.
Sarah tested the anchors and mechanical advantage carefully, knowing that equipment failure would likely result in serious injuries or death. When she was satisfied with the setup, she signaled Morrison that they were ready to begin the vertical extraction.
Torres went first, climbing rapidly to establish security positions at the top of the cliff face. Johnson followed, carrying the team's precision rifle and extra ammunition for continued engagement of pursuing forces.
Sarah remained at the bottom with Rivera while Walsh and Morrison prepared to assist with the mechanical lifting system. The ascent began with Santos providing covering fire, while Kim moved up the rope, using the mechanical assistance Sarah had rigged.
The system worked exactly as designed, allowing Kim to climb efficiently while reducing the physical demands on the team members below. Sarah felt a surge of professional pride as her improvised engineering proved effective under combat conditions.
Rivera's turn came as enemy forces moved within 400 meters of their position. Automatic weapons fire echoed off the canyon walls while bullets struck rocks uncomfortably close to their location.
Sarah could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions and realized that they were running out of time before being engaged at effective range. "Rivera, you're going up now," Sarah announced, securing the harness around his chest and under his injured shoulder.
Trust the system and focus on using your legs to walk up the rock face. We'll handle everything else.
The first 20 feet went smoothly, with Rivera finding good footing against the rock face while the mechanical advantage system allowed Morrison and Walsh to lift him steadily. Sarah maintained tension on a guide rope to prevent him from spinning or swinging away from the cliff face. Then disaster struck. A burst of automatic weapons fire from below caused Rivera to instinctively duck, throwing off his balance and swinging him sideways into a rocky projection. Sarah heard him cry out in pain as his injured shoulder struck the stone, but the harness system held and prevented him from falling. "Rivera, are you okay?" Sarah called up to him. "Shoulder took another hit, but I'm still functional," Rivera replied through gritted teeth. "Keep pulling me up." Sarah could see blood seeping through the fresh bandage on Rivera's shoulder, indicating that the impact had reopened his wound.
But stopping the ascent now would trap the entire team in an untenable position between enemy forces and an insurmountable obstacle. Morrison and Walsh resumed lifting while Sarah managed the guide rope to prevent further collisions with the rock face. Rivera gritted his teeth and continued pushing with his legs, showing remarkable determination despite obvious agony from his re-injured shoulder. Santos had been maintaining covering fire from below, but his ammunition was running low, and enemy forces were moving close enough for effective small arms engagement. Sarah could hear bullets striking rocks around their position with increasing frequency and accuracy. "Dr. Chen, you're next," Morrison called down as Rivera reached the top of the cliff face with Torres's assistance. Sarah secured her medical pack and weapons before clipping into the rope system. The ascent was physically demanding even with mechanical assistance, requiring her to walk up the vertical rock face while trusting that the anchor points would hold her weight. Halfway up, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions less than 200 meters away. A bullet struck the rock face inches from her left hand, sending stone fragments across her face and reinforcing how desperate their situation had become. Sarah forced herself to focus on the climbing technique rather than the immediate danger, knowing that hesitation or panic would likely result in a fall that could injure her and trap the rest of the team. She reached the top as Santos began his own ascent, the last team member to leave the valley floor. Below them, Sarah could see enemy fighters advancing through the terrain they had just abandoned, moving with confidence toward positions where they believed they would find trapped American soldiers. Morrison was already planning their next movement phase while monitoring radio communications with base operations. The cliff face had bought them time and distance from immediate pursuit, but enemy forces would undoubtedly find alternative routes to continue the hunt. "Base operations has 2 Apache gunships en route to our position," Torres reported with obvious relief. "Estimated time of arrival 45 minutes. They should be able to suppress enemy forces and provide cover for helicopter extraction." Sarah immediately moved to Rivera's position and examined his re-injured shoulder. The impact with the rock face had torn some of the sutures she had placed earlier, causing renewed bleeding that would need immediate attention to prevent dangerous blood loss. "I need to repair this damage right now," she told Rivera while pulling medical supplies from her pack. "The bleeding isn't immediately life-threatening, but it will become dangerous if we can't get it controlled." Working quickly in the fading afternoon light, Sarah cleaned the wound and placed additional sutures to control the bleeding. Rivera remained conscious and alert, but she could see the cumulative effects of blood loss, pain, and physical exertion in his increasingly pale complexion. "How much longer can he continue at this pace?" Morrison asked quietly while Sarah worked. "Honestly, he's already operating beyond what should be physically possible," Sarah replied.
The combination of blood loss, pain, and exhaustion should have incapacitated him by now. He's running on pure determination, but that won't last forever.
Morrison nodded grimly, understanding the implications for their extraction timeline. If Rivera collapsed during movement to the helicopter landing zone, they would face the impossible choice between abandoning him or compromising the entire team's survival. Sarah finished treating Rivera's shoulder and prepared her medical pack for the final phase of their escape. Through the gathering darkness, she could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. Either salvation or additional enemy forces, depending on which side reached them first.
The Apache gunships arrived at 1847 hours, their distinctive rotor signature cutting through the mountain air like mechanical thunder. Sarah watched from their rocky position as the two aircraft swept through the valley below, their thermal imaging systems searching for enemy forces while their crew-served weapons remained ready to engage any threats to the stranded SEAL team.
Morrison coordinated with the Apache flight leader through Torres while Sarah continued monitoring Rivera's deteriorating condition. Despite her efforts to control the bleeding from his re-injured shoulder, Rivera had lost a dangerous amount of blood over the past 4 hours. His skin was pale and clammy, his pulse rapid but weak, and his responses were becoming noticeably slower. Apache lead, this is SEAL Team 7, Morrison transmitted over the radio. We have one casualty requiring immediate medical evacuation and need cover for movement to extraction point 3. Enemy forces estimated at platoon strength with possible reinforcements arriving. The lead Apache pilot responded with professional calm despite the obviously dangerous tactical situation.
SEAL Team 7, we have thermal contacts throughout the valley matching your enemy estimates. We'll establish a combat air patrol pattern and engage targets that pose immediate threats to your movement. 1.
Extraction bird is wheels up from Chapman and will be on station in 22 minutes. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with renewed anxiety.
22 minutes wasn't long in normal circumstances, but Rivera's condition was deteriorating rapidly enough that she wasn't certain he could remain conscious and mobile for that duration. She began preparing contingency supplies in case she needed to establish IV access for fluid resuscitation during the final extraction phase.
The movement to extraction point 3 required another hour of difficult terrain navigation, including a descent through a narrow ravine that would expose them to potential ambush from multiple directions. Morrison made the tactical decision to move immediately while Apache cover was available rather than waiting for the extraction helicopter to arrive.
Rivera, Sarah said quietly as the team prepared to move. I need complete honesty about your physical condition. Are you experiencing dizziness, tunnel vision, or confusion? Rivera hesitated before answering, and Sarah could see him struggling to assess his own capabilities objectively. Some dizziness when I stand up quickly, and my vision seems a little fuzzy around the edges.
But I can still move, and I can still think clearly. It was exactly what Sarah had feared. Rivera was showing early signs of hypovolemic shock from blood loss, which would rapidly progress to unconsciousness and circulatory collapse without immediate medical intervention. She made the difficult decision to administer additional IV fluids despite the challenges of maintaining intravenous access during movement through rough terrain. I'm starting another IV, she informed Morrison while preparing the necessary equipment.
Rivera is showing signs of shock and needs fluid replacement immediately. It will slow our movement for 5 minutes, but the alternative is having him collapse during the extraction. Morrison nodded understanding while monitoring the tactical situation through his radio communications with the Apache flight leader. Enemy forces were repositioning throughout the valley, apparently trying to establish ambush positions along the most likely extraction routes. Sarah established IV access in Rivera's uninjured arm and began rapid fluid administration using a pressure bag to force saline solution into his circulation. Rivera's vital signs improved slightly with the additional fluid volume, but she knew it was only a temporary measure. He needed blood transfusion and surgical repair that could only be provided at a combat support hospital. The team began movement toward extraction point 3 with Santos and Kim providing point security while Johnson covered their rear approach. Sarah walked directly behind Rivera, monitoring his condition while maintaining the IV fluid administration through a system she had rigged to work during movement. The Apache gunships provided continuous overwatch, their thermal sensors detecting enemy movement long before ground forces could visually identify threats.
Sarah heard the distinctive sound of 30 mm chain gun fire as one of the helicopters engaged a group of fighters who had positioned themselves along the planned extraction route. Apache lead reports 8 enemy combatants neutralized, Torres transmitted over the team radio.
Flight lead advises that enemy forces are attempting to establish surface-to-air missile positions on the eastern ridgeline. Extraction bird will need to approach from the western corridor to avoid possible missile engagement.
Sarah realized that the tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex as enemy forces adapted to the presence of American air support. Surface-to-air missiles would force the extraction helicopter to use terrain masking and rapid approach techniques that would be dangerous for helicopter crews and challenging for wounded personnel. They had been moving for 30 minutes when Rivera stumbled and nearly fell, catching himself against a rocky outcropping while his face went completely white. Sarah immediately moved to his side, checking his pulse and assessing his level of consciousness.
"Rivera, talk to me," she said firmly. "How are you feeling right now?" "Dizzy as hell," Rivera admitted, no longer attempting to downplay his condition.
Everything is spinning and I'm having trouble focusing my eyes. Everything is fixed and different. Sarah checked his IV site and found that the fluid administration had been successful in temporarily stabilizing his blood pressure, but his overall condition was deteriorating faster than she could compensate with field medicine alone.
Rivera needed immediate helicopter evacuation to a trauma center, not another hour of movement through mountain terrain. "Morrison," she called quietly, "Rivera isn't going to make it to the extraction point under his own power. He's progressing to advanced shock despite fluid resuscitation. We need to either call for immediate extraction at our current position or develop a plan to carry him the rest of the way." Morrison moved back to assess Rivera's condition personally, his expression grim as he recognized the seriousness of the medical situation. Rivera was conscious and alert, but his face was ashen and his hands were trembling from the physiological stress of blood loss and shock.
"Options?" Morrison asked tersely.
"We can construct an improvised litter using equipment we're carrying," Sarah replied quickly.
"It will require 4 people to carry him effectively, leaving only 3 for security. Or we can risk calling for extraction at our current position, but this location offers limited landing zone options for the helicopter."
The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed from the valley below as enemy forces engaged one of the Apache gunships. Sarah could see tracer rounds arcing through the darkening sky while the helicopter maneuvered to avoid ground fire.
The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly as enemy reinforcements arrived and began engaging American air support. "Extraction bird is 5 minutes out," Torres reported over the radio. "Pilot requests confirmation of landing zone conditions and enemy threat assessment." Morrison made the command decision quickly. "We're going to carry Rivera to extraction point 3. Santos can rig a litter using ponchos and equipment straps. Johnson, Torres maintain security during movement. Dr. Chen, do whatever you need to do to keep Rivera stable during transport. Now."
Sarah began preparing medical equipment for movement while Santos and Kim constructed an improvised litter using ponchos, equipment straps, and trekking poles from their personal gear. The litter would be uncomfortable and far from ideal, but it would allow them to transport Rivera safely while maintaining his IV access and monitoring his vital signs.
Rivera protested weakly as they prepared to load him onto the improvised stretcher. "I can still walk." "Don't risk the whole team because of my injuries." "Rivera," Sarah said firmly while checking his IV site, "you've already done more than anyone should expect. Now let us do our jobs and get you out of here safely." The litter carry began with Morrison and Santos at the head, Kim and Walsh at the foot, while Sarah walked alongside monitoring Rivera's condition and managing the IV fluid administration. Johnson provided rear security while Torres maintained communication with both the Apache gunships and the incoming extraction helicopter. Movement with the litter was slow and physically demanding, requiring careful coordination between the 4 carriers while navigating rocky terrain and failing light. Sarah watched Rivera's face carefully, noting that while he remained conscious, his responses were becoming increasingly sluggish as shock progressed despite her medical interventions. The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridgeline at 1923 hours, its crew immediately coordinating with the Apache gunships to establish security for the landing zone. Sarah could see the aircraft through her night vision equipment, a UH-60 Blackhawk configured for medical evacuation, with flight medics standing by to provide advanced trauma care during the return flight to base. "Extraction bird is requesting medical information on the casualty," Torres transmitted over the radio. "Flight medic wants to know what medical equipment and supplies they should have ready for immediate care." Sarah keyed her radio to respond directly to the flight medic. "We have 1 casualty with gunshot wound to left shoulder, significant blood loss, currently in early shock despite IV fluid resuscitation. Patient is conscious and alert but showing signs of hypovolemia. He'll need immediate blood products and possible surgical intervention upon arrival at medical facility." The helicopter touched down in a swirl of rotor wash and blowing debris while the Apache gunships maintained overwatch positions around the landing zone. Sarah helped transfer Rivera to the aircraft's medical stretcher while briefing the flight medic on treatment provided and current medical status. "Nice work, Doc,"
the flight medic said quickly while connecting Rivera to the helicopter's advanced life support equipment. Your field treatment probably saved his life. We'll take good care of him from here. Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with exhaustion as she watched Rivera disappear into the helicopter's cabin.
The flight medic was right. Her medical interventions during the extraction had likely prevented Rivera from progressing to irreversible shock that could have proven fatal. The remaining team members boarded the helicopter quickly while the Apache gunships continued engaging enemy forces throughout the valley. As the Black Hawk lifted off and banked toward forward operating base Chapman, Sarah could see muzzle flashes and explosions below as the battle continued without them. Morrison moved to sit beside her during the flight, his expression thoughtful as he studied her face in the red interior lighting of the helicopter cabin.
For the first time since she had joined SEAL Team 7, Sarah saw something other than skepticism in his eyes. Dr. Raypen. Chen, Morrison said over the helicopter's noise, I owe you an apology and an acknowledgement. Your performance today was exceptional under extremely difficult circumstances.
Rivera would have died without your medical expertise and your refusal to quit when the situation looked hopeless. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she struggled to control. Morrison's recognition meant more than any formal commendation because it came from someone who had initially doubted her capabilities and had been convinced that including her on the team was a mistake. Thank you, sir, she replied quietly.
But Rivera's survival was a team effort. Everyone contributed to getting him out alive.
That's true, Morrison acknowledged. But you were the critical factor. Your medical skills, your problem-solving under pressure, and your physical endurance during that extraction made the difference between bringing Rivera home alive or carrying his body back for burial.
Santos, who had been listening to their conversation, leaned forward to add his perspective.
Doc, I've worked with a lot of medics over the years, and I've never seen anyone perform better under that kind of pressure.
You earned your place on this team today. Similar comments came from other team members during the flight back to base.
Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in her relationship with SEAL Team 7. She was no longer the outsider they tolerated because of orders from higher command. She had become, through performance under fire, a trusted member of their brotherhood. The helicopter touched down at forward operating base Chapman 43 minutes after takeoff, with Rivera immediately transported to the base medical facility for emergency surgery.
Sarah accompanied him to ensure continuity of care while the rest of SEAL Team 7 reported to command for debriefing on the failed capture mission.
In the medical facility, Sarah provided detailed information about Rivera's injuries and treatment to the surgical team while observing the advanced trauma procedures that would complete his care. She felt the familiar satisfaction of seeing field medicine successfully integrated with hospital-level treatment to save a life that would have been lost in previous conflicts.
Dr. Marcus Webb, the base chief of surgery, approached Sarah as Rivera was wheeled into the operating room.
Dr. Chen, I wanted to personally thank you for the medical care you provided during the extraction.
Rivera arrived here in stable condition despite significant blood loss, which speaks to the quality of your field treatment. I'm glad we got him here in time for definitive care, Sarah replied. How do you think he'll do?
Excellent prognosis, Webb answered. The shoulder will require some reconstruction work, but he should regain full function within 6 months.
More importantly, your fluid resuscitation and bleeding control prevented him from going into irreversible shock. That kind of field medicine saves lives. Sarah felt exhausted but satisfied as she made her way back to her quarters later that evening. The mission had been a tactical failure. They hadn't captured the target and had been forced to abandon the operation under enemy pressure.
But from her perspective, it had been a profound success. She had proven herself capable of performing at the highest level under combat conditions, and more importantly, she had earned the respect and trust of SEAL Team 7.
As she fell asleep that night, Sarah thought about Rivera's words during the extraction. Don't risk the whole team because of my injuries.
It was exactly the kind of selfless attitude that defined the special operations community, and she realized that she had finally become part of something larger than herself, a brotherhood united by shared sacrifice and unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home alive. 6 weeks later, Sarah Chen stood in the base medical facility watching Rivera work through physical therapy exercises designed to restore full function to his left shoulder. The surgical reconstruction had been successful, and his recovery was progressing faster than anyone had anticipated.
More importantly, his experience during the extraction had transformed his attitude toward her from skeptical tolerance to genuine respect and friendship. Doc, you got to see this. Rivera called out as he successfully completed a series of overhead movements that had been impossible just 2 weeks earlier.
The physical therapist says I'm ahead of schedule thanks to whatever you did to keep that shoulder stable during the extraction.
Sarah smiled while reviewing Rivera's medical chart and noting the progress he had made since surgery. The gunshot wound had healed cleanly without infection, and the surgical repair had restored normal anatomy better than anyone had hoped.
But she knew that Rivera's rapid recovery was as much due to his own determination as to any medical treatment. The relationship between Sarah and SEAL Team 7 had evolved dramatically since the failed capture mission in the Korengal Valley.
What had begun as professional skepticism had transformed into genuine acceptance based on shared experiences under fire. She was no longer the outsider they tolerated. She had become an integral member of their operational unit.
Morrison entered the medical facility carrying what appeared to be official paperwork, his expression serious but not unfriendly.
Since the extraction mission, his attitude towards Sarah had undergone a complete transformation. The man who had initially argued against her assignment now actively sought her input on medical planning for future operations.
Dr. Chen, Morrison said formally, I have something I need to discuss with you privately. Sarah felt a momentary surge of anxiety, wondering if Morrison was about to deliver news about reassignment or changes to her operational status.
She followed him into a private office where he closed the door and gestured for her to take a seat. I've just received word from SOCOM headquarters about our after-action report from the Korengal mission, Morrison began, his tone carefully neutral.
There are some things you need to know about how that report was received and what it means for your future assignments. Sarah waited quietly while Morrison organized his thoughts, trying to read his expression for clues about whether this conversation would be positive or negative for her career prospects. First, Morrison continued, your performance during that extraction has been noted at the highest levels of Special Operations Command.
The medical care you provided to Rivera combined with your tactical performance under fire has been cited as exemplary in official reports that will become part of your permanent record. Sarah felt relief wash over her as Morrison's words indicated recognition rather than criticism.
She had wondered whether her medical decisions during the crisis would be second-guessed by senior officers who hadn't experienced the pressure of the tactical situation. Second, Morrison added with something that might have been a smile, SEAL Team 7 has formally requested that you be assigned permanently to our unit for future operations.
That's not something we've ever done before, and it required extensive justification to convince command that we needed a dedicated medical officer at our operational level. The significance of Morrison's words took a moment to fully register. SEAL Team 7 was requesting her permanent assignment, not accepting her presence under orders, but actively wanting her to remain with their unit. It represented validation beyond anything she could have imagined when she first arrived at the base.
Sir, Sarah replied carefully, I'm honored by the team's confidence, but I want to make sure this isn't just a reaction to one successful mission. I understand that special operations require long-term commitment and absolute reliability under varied conditions.
Morrison nodded approvingly at her response. Dr. Chen, that mission wasn't successful because you got lucky or because circumstances were favorable.
It was successful because you demonstrated exactly the kind of medical expertise, tactical discipline, and personal courage that special operations demand. The team's request for your permanent assignment is based on careful evaluation of your performance under the worst possible conditions.
Sarah felt a surge of professional pride mixed with determination to continue proving herself worthy of the trust SEAL Team 7 was placing in her. Permanent assignment to a special operations unit represented the pinnacle of military medical careers, but it also carried responsibilities and expectations that would challenge her capabilities in ways she was only beginning to understand.
There's one more thing, Morrison added, his expression becoming more serious. Command has indicated that if you accept permanent assignment to SEAL Team 7, you'll be expected to complete additional training programs to enhance your tactical skills and operational capabilities.
This isn't optional. It's a requirement for anyone who wants to operate at our level long-term. Sarah understood the implications immediately. Additional training would mean months of intensive programs designed to push her physical and mental capabilities to their absolute limits. She would be expected to meet the same standards as every other team member, with no allowances made for her size, gender, or medical specialty.
What kind of additional training are we talking about? She asked, wanting to understand the commitment fully before making any decisions. Morrison consulted his paperwork before responding. Advanced combat medical training, tactical leadership courses, specialized reconnaissance training, and enhanced marksmanship programs. Essentially everything necessary to make you a fully qualified special operations medical officer rather than a regular medic attached to a special operations unit. The distinction was crucial. Special operations medical officers were expected to function as both medical specialists and tactical operators, capable of leading combat missions when circumstances required.
It was a level of responsibility and capability that few military medical personnel ever achieved. How long would this training take, Sarah asked, already knowing the answer would require significant personal sacrifice and commitment. Approximately 8 months of various programs spread over the next year, Morrison replied. Some courses can be completed while remaining assigned to the team, but others will require temporary duty at specialized training facilities. It's not going to be easy. The command believes you have the potential to excel in these programs. Sarah considered the offer carefully, weighing the professional opportunities against the personal costs.
Accepting permanent assignment to SEAL Team 7 would essentially define the rest of her military career, limiting future assignment options, while opening doors to experiences and responsibilities available to very few military medical personnel. Rivera appeared in the doorway of the office, having apparently overheard portions of their conversation.
His presence reminded Sarah of the bonds that had formed between her and the team members during their shared experiences under fire. "Doc," Rivera said seriously, "I hope you're considering accepting that assignment. This team works better with you as part of it, and there are probably other people out there who are going to need the kind of medical expertise you bring to these operations." Sarah looked at Rivera's sincere expression and thought about the moment during the extraction when his life had hung in the balance between her medical skills and the unforgiving reality of combat injuries. Saving Rivera had been deeply satisfying, but she realized that her role extended beyond treating individual casualties to enabling the entire team to take on missions that would otherwise be too dangerous to attempt. "Sir," she said to Morrison, "I accept the assignment and the additional training requirements. SEAL Team 7 has become more than just my unit. It's become my professional home. I want to continue serving with these men and helping ensure that we all come home safely from whatever missions we're assigned." Morrison's expression showed approval and perhaps relief that she had accepted the challenges ahead. "Outstanding. I'll inform command of your decision and begin coordinating your training schedule. Fair warning, the programs you'll be attending have high washout rates, and the standards won't be adjusted because of your medical background or previous performance." "I wouldn't want them to be," Sarah replied firmly. "If I'm going to be a full member of this team, I need to earn that status through the same standards everyone else meets." Over the following weeks, Sarah began preparing for the intensive training programs that would define her transformation from combat medic to special operations medical officer. She increased her physical conditioning, enhanced her weapons proficiency, and studied tactical doctrine that would be essential for advanced leadership roles. The first training program began 3 months later at Fort Bragg, where Sarah joined special operations personnel from various services for advanced combat medical training. The course was designed to teach medical techniques specific to special operations environments, prolonged field care, mass casualty procedures under fire, and medical planning for complex operations. Sarah found herself challenged in ways she hadn't anticipated. The medical procedures were familiar, but performing them while under simulated enemy fire, with limited supplies, and under extreme time pressure, tested her abilities beyond anything she had experienced in combat. She struggled initially but gradually adapted to the heightened stress and complexity. The physical demands of the training were equally challenging. Sarah had always maintained excellent fitness, but special operations training pushed her endurance and strength to levels she hadn't thought possible. She completed obstacle courses designed to simulate operational environments, participated in forced marches carrying full equipment loads, and demonstrated shooting accuracy under physical exhaustion. Perhaps most challenging was the leadership training component, where she was expected to plan and lead simulated missions while being evaluated on tactical decision-making under pressure. Sarah discovered that her medical background provided unique perspectives on operational planning, particularly regarding casualty evacuation and risk assessment. After completing the advanced medical training, Sarah returned to SEAL Team 7 with enhanced capabilities and renewed confidence in her ability to serve at the special operations level. The team welcomed her back enthusiastically, noting improvements in her tactical awareness and operational confidence. Rivera, who had returned to full duty during her absence, greeted her with obvious enthusiasm. "Doc, you look different," he observed. "More like an operator and less like a medic who happens to be assigned to an operational unit." Sarah understood what Rivera meant. The training had transformed not just her capabilities but her self-perception. She no longer felt like an outsider trying to prove herself worthy of inclusion. She had become a special operations medical officer whose expertise was integral to the team's mission success. Morrison confirmed her new status during her first team briefing after returning from training. "Dr. Chen has completed advanced combat medical training and tactical leadership courses with distinguished performance," he announced to the assembled team.
She'll be taking on expanded responsibilities for medical planning and will serve as acting team leader for specific mission components when appropriate. The significance of Morrison's announcement wasn't lost on anyone present. Sarah had achieved something unprecedented: full integration into a special operations unit as both medical specialist and tactical leader.
Her journey from skeptically tolerated outsider to respected team member was complete. 6 months later, Sarah found herself planning medical support for a complex hostage rescue operation in a remote region of Afghanistan. Her role had evolved far beyond treating casualties to include strategic planning, risk assessment, and operational leadership responsibilities that drew on both her medical expertise and her hard-won tactical knowledge. As she reviewed mission plans with Morrison and the team, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment.
The failed capture mission in the Korangal Valley had tested everyone involved, but it had also forged bonds based on shared sacrifice and mutual respect that went far beyond professional cooperation. Rivera, now fully recovered and serving as team reconnaissance specialist, caught her attention during the briefing.
"Doc," he said quietly, "I never thanked you properly for what you did during that extraction. You saved my life, but more than that, you proved that this team is stronger with you as part of it." Sarah smiled at Rivera's words while continuing to study the mission plans. The hostage rescue operation would be dangerous and complex, requiring medical support capabilities that could adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations.
But she felt confident in her abilities and in the team she would be supporting. Looking around the briefing room at the faces of SEAL Team 7, Sarah realized that she had finally found her place in the military.
She was no longer trying to prove she belonged. She simply belonged, earning her position through competence, courage, and commitment to bringing everyone home alive. The mission would launch in 72 hours, and Sarah knew that her medical skills would once again be tested under fire. But this time, she would face those challenges not as an outsider trying to earn acceptance, but as a fully qualified Special Operations Medical Officer whose expertise was integral to mission success and team survival.
As the briefing concluded and team members dispersed to begin their individual preparations, Sarah remained in the room studying mission details and planning medical contingencies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate the capabilities she had worked so hard to develop.
But tonight, for the first time since joining SEAL Team 7, she felt completely confident in her place among warriors who had become not just teammates, but brothers who trusted her with their lives just as she trusted them with hers. The journey from doubt to acceptance was complete, but the mission to keep good people alive in dangerous places would continue for as long as she wore the uniform.